Chapter 10. The True Jerusalem and the False. The Jerusalem of modern times is not the city of the Scriptures. Mount Calvary, now nearly at the centre of the city, was without the walls at the time of the crucifixion, and the greater part of Mount Zion, which is now without, was within the ancient city. The holy places are for the most part the fanciful dreams of monkish enthusiasts to increase the veneration of the pilgrims. Reverend J. P. Lawson. It is a curious fact that after the crushing defeat of the Jews in AD 70 by Titans, a province under the aegis of Rome, there is little or nothing of outstanding importance to relate of Britain for the next 50 years. It does not signify, however, that in the absence of Roman reports, everything was beautifully peaceful. From 83 onwards, Agricola, with a considerable and well-appointed army, as well as a Roman fleet, pushed his conquest northwards, and in 84 he gained a great victory over the Caledonians, led by their chieftain, Galgacus, who in a rousing speech to his forces, including many charioteers, emphasized the greed of the Romans, and how defeated opponents were made slaves. Despite Agricola's victory, his conquests were not destined to be permanent. Except that the Brigantes caused occasional trouble, the dogs of war were apparently sleeping, yet trouble on a big scale was brewing. About 120-21, Hadrian, 117 to 138, one of the most popular and efficient of Roman emperors, visited Britain, adjusting many things there, says Spartanius, his biographer. What he was adjusting was to erect a wall, murum primus ductus, 80 miles long, to separate the barbarians from the Romans. It may be inferred that Hadrian personally inspected the site of the wall, or the barrier, when completed. Spartanius preserves some verses sent to the emperor by the poet Florus, in which he says, "I wish not to be Caesar, to walk through Britons, to endure Scythian frosts." Poetic license, it is true, might use such a term as Scythian frost without necessarily implying Caesar's visit to Scotland, but it would scarcely include the imagery building of a wall 80 miles in length. Where was this wall? The Roman wall between Tynemouth and Solway. Firth is wrongly called Hadrian's Wall to this day, for as what's more points out, the Tyne Wall was not erected before the reign of Emperor Severus in the 3rd century AD, although certain forts may have been raised earlier. In any case, its length is only 68 miles, 12 miles short of that mentioned by Spartius, and 12 miles of a wall are not to be ignored. The wall of Servius is not, moreover, mentioned in any Roman record before Notatia, circa 400. The other wall, the Antonine or Graham's Dyke, is 32 miles wide overall, and that was only reconstructed in the reign of Antonius Pius, Hadrian's successor. Thus we must search elsewhere. What's more, in his Insula Britannica, appears to have solved the mystery of the third wall, which he identifies with the catrail, a lengthy earthwork which survives in places immediately across the border from the junction of the rivers Liddel and Esk, and thence northwards in the direction of the Forth, possibly to Caneil, the point of Aelia. Whatmore proposes it starts from Leith, the port of Edinburgh, and estimates its overall length at about 80 miles. Whether it began at Leith or as some other link at Caneil, it explains Hadrian's Wall in more ways than one. The Gedeni are placed by Ptolemy as occupying just that area, and the name catrail survives as a variation of Gad. Whether it commenced at Caneil or Leith, it must have bounded the ancient city, and its descendants southward along the Gala Water to Galashiels, Selkirk and Hawick, to the end of the confines of Dumfries and Cumberland. The intention was evidently to pin the bellicose Silures or Jews behind the barrier. Whatmore, however, does not appear to have had the slightest idea that the unrest which caused Hadrian in 120 to 121 to rail off the Silures was concerned with the Jews of Jerusalem. The catrail, or trench, about 20 feet wide and now only about 3 or 4 feet in height, has the excavated earth piles on the slopes which it abuts. It starts from Borwick Water in the south end and goes northwards via Galashiels, where clear traces of the rail survive, also at Selkirk. The name rail suggests a barrier or a Cat or a Gad tribe, the name preserved at Jed Burra, Gad Burra, Gade River, Cadrum Bar, Gadon Moon, and the castle or Cat Castle of Stonehouse. Waddell describes it as an earthwork rampart and a trench or a ditch, extending from near the Pentland Hills to the Cheviots, separating Berwick from Strathclyde, but he does not venture any opinion as to why this was carried out. It yet mystifies archaeologists. The answer may be sought in the Spartians' report to divide the barbarians from the Romans. The use of the name Gad suggests that the Silures were supported by the Scottish tribes across the isthmus. There can be little doubt that Hadrian for many years was harassed by increasing opposition from the Jews and their allies. Gibbon writes on this aspect of the period in question. From the reign of Nero to that of Antonius Pius, the Jews discovered a fierce impatience with the dominion of Rome, which repeatedly broke out in the most furious of massacres and insurrections. The enthusiasms of the Jews were supported by the opinion that it was unlawful for them to pay taxes to an adulterous master, and that a conquering Messiah would soon arise, destined to break their fetters and to invest the favourites of heaven with the empire of the earth. It was by announcing himself as their long-expected deliverer, and by calling on the descendants of Abraham to assert the hope of Israel, that the famous Bar Kochba collected a formidable army with which he resisted during the 2 years of power of the Emperor Hadrian. Simon, son of the Star. Reports of these preparations by those Gibbon terms a race of fanatics induced Hadrian to settle a Roman colony in Jerusalem, and brought the revolt to a head. In 134 the banner of the Messiah was raised with resounding tumult. Portents were seen in the sky, and the clouds were anxiously watched for the glory which would deliver them from their persecutors, as had happened before in their history. Bar Kochba, the son of the Star, was acclaimed as the Messiah. Miracles were ascribed to him. Flames were seen to issue from his mouth. Excited multitudes flocked to his standard, and the whole Jewish nation was in a violent convulsion. The heights about Jerusalem, the Mounts of Olives and others were fortified. The hysterical enthusiasm with which the Jews flocked to the standard of the impostor shows how easy it was to delude them with this messianic belief, supported by their priests or their druids. The chief rabbi, Akiva, declared that the prophecy of Balaam, "A star shall arise out of Jacob," was accomplished, publicly anointed Bar Kochba king of the Jews, and placed a crown upon his head, after which he followed him to the field at the head of 24,000 horsemen, in the capacity of his master of the horse. Finally, coins were minted bearing the inscription, "First year of redemption," the reverse adorned with the insignia of a Scottish thistle, for luck. The Bar Kochba shekel, tetra drachm. The temple with the rising star, Shimon the thistle, to the freedom of Jerusalem. For 2 years the indomitable Jews held the Romans at bay by means of guerrilla warfare. Finally they were besieged at Bathars, a strongly fortified position on a mountain not far from Jerusalem, and utterly defeated. According to Dion, in this terrible war, 580,000 Jews were cut off by sword, beside an infinite number in addition who perished by famine, disease, or fire. Bathars, the site of this disaster, searched for in vain in the Palestine of today, may be identified with some confidence as the Knock, a once strongly fortified camp towering 1,007 feet in height at Bathgate, 19 miles from Edinburgh. Jerusalem as a city suffered the extreme penalty again, to quote Gibbon. The Romans, exasperated by the Jews' repeated rebellions, exercised the rights of victory with unusual vigour. The emperor founded under the name of Capitolina a new city, to which he gave the privileges of a colony, and denouncing the severest penalties against any of the Jewish people who should dare to approach its precincts. He fixed a vigilant garrison of a Roman cohort to enforce the execution of his orders. In the Story of the Nation series, Hosmer describes the aftermath. Bar Kochba, whom many Jews believed to be the Messiah, headed a revolt put down by the Emperor Hadrian. The taking of his stronghold, Bathars, was a coup de grace. Palestine was utterly devastated, the land full of graves, the market with slaves, the towns given over to wolves and hyenas. Even the name of Jerusalem was lost. A pagan city, Aelia Capitolina, arose from its site. A temple to Jupiter stood upon Mount Zion, about which was gathered a population of Roman veterans, of Greeks, Phoenicians and Syrians. No Jews could enter the city under the pain of death. The writer is not entirely correct. That wolves and hyenas prowled about is probably a fiction, and the temple of Herod, on whose site was erected one to Jupiter, was not on Mount Zion, which was the citadel, but on Mount Moriah. What happened in reality was that Hadrian caused the temple to be razed to the ground. The tower of Antonia, built by Herod adjoining the temple, was also thrown down in a heap. The palace or castle on the adjoining hill was largely destroyed, and the city walls were demolished. The very name Jerusalem became taboo, and it was named Aelia Capitolina, after Elias, the first name of Hadrian. But as such, it did not survive, yet it may still be traced in Canil, Kin, Can or Kin, a head or a point, Ilia, by Bonnes, originally Pont Ilia, at the extremity of the Antonine Wall, the boundary of the north, Hadrian's new city. Jews were forbidden to enter the city or to approach it, and those who did were condemned to death, except for one day yearly, when they might view it from the extremity of the Mount of Olives, King Arthur's seat. Only one way led open for Jews to dwell in the former holy city, and that was by the adoption of Christianity. The Nazarenes, a highly religious Jewish sect, adopted the Christian faith, elected by Marcus a Gentile as their bishop, and at his persuasion the most part of the congregation renounced the Mosaic law, and therefore acquired admission into the new colonia of Hadrian. In view of these facts, it may now be realized why Hadrian, after his final, dangerous rebellion against Roman domination, which was suppressed with difficulty, erected a rail or a barrier to prevent the Jews from returning to their former capital. The action of the emperor has been stigmatized by writers as harsh, but the Roman viewpoint deserves consideration. For some 200 years, the Caesarian power had experienced periodic uprisings with these intractable people who firmly believed themselves to be a chosen race. superior to all others, according to their prophet Moses. The Romans were extremely tolerant to all religions before they adopted Christianity, and if the Jews placed faith in Jehovah, they did not interfere. On the other hand, when they refused to pay their tribute or taxes because of the religion forbade the recognition of a gentle ruler, then the Romans regarded it as akin to anarchy, so they eliminated them as a nation and expelled them from their sacred city. As we have seen, the Jews had been subversive to Roman power as far back as the reign of Herod the Great, who had to maintain a difficult equilibrium by keeping in with Rome in the time of Augustus, and also maintaining his prestige with his Jewish subjects. The building of his temple was to curry favour with his subjects, but he alienated them by adorning its eastern facade with an enormous golden eagle, the insignia of Rome. This aroused violent hostility among the priests and others. As suggested earlier, Herod's building of Caesarea at such expense for Augustus was a method of compromise to avoid a critical situation. The Jews in Hadrian's reign made long and secret preparations to finally expel the Romans. Hadrian must have been aware of this, for he had evidently visited the region himself. Dion Cassius tells us that in the year 131, Julius Severus, the emperor's leading general, was given the command to defeat the Jews. Historians, quite misled, imagine that he was recalled from Britain at this crucial period and sent against the Jews at the other extremity of the ancient world. Such is a complete error. He had been sent to Britain, specifically by Hadrian, because of the evidence of growing unrest and preparation for wars by the Jews in Britain. Hadrian himself is known to have visited Edinburgh or Caesarea on at least one occasion, possibly more. Ptolemy, who completed his description of Britain circa 140, shortly after the war in Hadrian's time, gives the name Gadeni to the region of Edinburgh, but omits to mention any city or town within it, which is a most unusual omission on his part. Whatmore, however, calls something about its name without suspecting the inner significance. In the triads of the 6th century he says, Kynon mab Clydno Eden. Kynon, son of Clydno of Edinburgh, was slain at the battle of Cathric. The victor, King Ida the Saxon, joined Dinguath, Dina's city, Guath or Gad, to Bernicia, Northumberland. In 685, Brudi, king of the Picts, expelled the Saxons from Geithlin Garan, or Geithlin el Gareth, which city the Venerable Bede called the city of Gudea. Furthermore, Penda, king of Mercia, lay at the city of Judea before the battle of Gai Campi, the same city which Ravenna terms Esjudescan in the 3rd century, a combination of Juden and Iska, the river of Edinburgh. In the 4th century, when Vortigern, an usurper, ruled in these parts, he is described by Geoffrey of Monmouth as Earl of Gisray, Jews. He involved himself in a war with the Picts and the people of Albany, and in dire straits appealed to the Angles of Scandinavian descent to aid him. In 449, Hengist and Horsa crossed the sea in their longships and began a series of invasions from the Danish sources. Hengist helped Vortigern to defeat the Picts on the other side of the Valum, or war, and the Gewissi, the nobles, gave him the land of the castle Carcory, which appears to refer to Castle Carry, an important sector of the wall, and a powerful fortress. This is much more likely the site of Hengst Castle than the supposed one at Doncaster. All these names, Gad, Gudi, Gwedi, Gudjoden, Ejudenska, Gwesi, appear as memories of Edinburgh's original name, as a variation of Caerleon, the city of the lion. Nor should we omit to recall the classic references which place the city of Jerusalem in Illyria. As was examined in my previous volume, Abram and Lot, who migrated south from Ur of the Chaldees with their Hebrew followers, were identical with the classical Comyns and Calyx, who went from Samothrace to Hebron, or under its Greek name, Cadmean Thebes, the first city of the Hebrews in the south. The day came when these Israelites were driven out of the land of Canaan, migrated to the city of the Jebusites, which they accorded the name Jerusalem, and captured it. The Greek legend told that the Cadmeans, expelled from their country of Thebes, the biblical Hebron, settled among Encheles in Illyria. This tradition supports a Greek myth whereby Cadmus, crushed by the doom inflicted upon his city of Thebes, retired among the Encheles, or the Enchelenes, or the Illyria, where his son Illyrius was born. The name Illyrius occurs in another myth, in which the Cyclops Polyphemus had 3 sons by Galatea, otherwise Re Cybele, consort of the deity Kronos, who were named Celtus, Gallus, and the youngest, Illyrius. Polyphemus here seems to be a synonym for Abraham or Cadmus, otherwise appears as Galatius to the goddess Galatea. More simply put, the Cadmeans regarded Abram or Cadmus as their patriarch, the founder of the Celtic or Gallic nation, and later that of Illyria, who were the Jews. Follow this to its logical conclusion. If Illyrius born of Illyria were the later born son of Cadmus, or his race and blood for such legends must be interpreted too literally, and if Cadmus were Abram, the implication is that there arose the later kingdom of Judea, and that another name for them, that is Illyrius or Illyrians, is simply a Greek variation of Siluria or Silurians. It has been seen, moreover, that adjoining the Edinburgh region lay the original Epirus, and that Illyria, placed in conjunction with Albania or Albany, is correct historically and geographically, and hence that, as with the other ancient sites and place names, we have been misled. The Silures, although mainly concentrated in the regions about Edinburgh, were also prominent in Wales, the Midlands, Wiltshire, Somerset, and Cornwall, for in those parts dwelt the Galileans and the Idumeans, or the Edomites. As Tacitus says, the Silures, from their coloured faces and plaited hair, were supposed to have sprung from a colony of the ancient Iberi, otherwise Hebrews. The original Illyria is alluded to, albeit vaguely, in a few passages that exist to establish its position. Pausanias, who describes how the Illyrians defeated the people of the Epirus, avers that red water as red blood may have been seen in the land of Hebrews near the city of Joppa. St. Paul's epistle to the Romans states, "From Jerusalem and round about into Elysium I have preached the gospel of Christ." Romans 15, verse 19. Unless the two were closely connected, his allusion is meaningless. There can be little doubt that the apostle was prominent in spreading the gospel from Edinburgh and all its surrounding regions. An ancient MS in the Bodleian Library previously mentioned is said to contain letters between Paul and Seneca relating to his former residence in Siluria, which may be translated as Edinburgh. All the foregoing evidence, both as to the site and place names, directs an unerring finger to Edinburgh. One further sidelight on its geographical position is worth consideration. When the Jews returned after the captivity in Babylon to Jerusalem by permission of Cyrus, and began to erect Zerubbabel's temple and the city walls. The Samaritans and others who had suffered under Judean tyranny in the past complained to Artaxerxes, Cambyses, and asked that the old record should be searched, when it would be proved to have been a seditious city, and if rebuilt, that thou shalt have no portion this side of the river. The king of Persia had the search made, and in consequence stopped all building. He sent word, "It is found that the city of old time hath made insurrections against kings. There have been mighty kings also over Jerusalem, which ruled over all the countries beyond the river, and toll, tribute, and custom was paid unto them." A further indication of the river Perath, the Euphrates, is given in the plea of Nehemiah, then in Susa, to the king of Persia, when he asked, "If it pleases the king, let us be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over until I come into Judah." Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 7. Such a request indicates something very different to the mere ferrying of a visitor across a river, even if a broad one. It suggests not only totally different conditions on the other side, but that a voyage across this river had to be arranged. In other words, it was a sea, a strait, or a gulf for which the word river was applied. As pointed out earlier, it is described in the book of Judith as the Great Strait of Judea. This apparent fact needed little stressing. All that need be said is that all such references are alien to the river in the Middle East termed Euphrates, which lies some 650 miles east of Jerusalem from the Arabian desert. Yet, as the text shows, Jerusalem lay on or near the sea. Solomon, we recall, reigned over the kings from Perath to the land of the Philistines to the borders of Egypt. 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 26. He was one of the mighty kings to whom Artaxerxes probably referred. To return, however, to the period of 132 to 136, in the reign of Hadrian, Jerusalem was no longer permitted to continue under its former regime. Its name was changed and it was forgotten, and thus it continued for over 2 centuries. Its very site and history had passed from men's minds, as such perhaps not surprising, considering no literature or history on the subject existed. But if we glance at the other side of the picture, namely that Caerleon, the city of the lion, had come to the fore as one of the 3 important cities which at the time of the Council of Arles had possessed 15 bishops after Marcus, the first to occupy the episcopal bench, it clarifies much. Nevertheless, some parts of the reconstructed city must have for long lain in ruins, as described in the 7th century by Giraldus Cambrensis. And from all that is known of the stern, unbending character of Edinburgh's citizens throughout their history, they took their religion very bitterly, like some nausea drug, essentially but unpleasant and leaving dour effects. They became Christians of the Essenes or the Nazarene persuasion, a severe faith based on the Mosaic cult rather than the Roman Church, which later leaned heavily to the Pauline doctrine. It was characteristic, which it might justly be claimed led far later to the violence shown to Queen Mary Stuart and the savage bigotry of the Covenanters, who indeed might well be considered as chips off the old block, with their fanatical destruction of all on which they could set eyes adulterous, while John Knox himself was a second Jeremiah. Edinburgh seems to have borne as many names as York through the ages. Originally Jerusalem, or Mount Agnid, then Aelia, subsequently Caerleon, and finally Eden, or Odin, otherwise Moses. How it acquired the latter name has never been satisfactorily resolved, but the Norsemen in the early days called it Hedon's Isle, which may be interpreted as the Eye of Odin. Traditionally, the Scandinavians believed that the eye of Odin, as expressed in the Edda, roamed over the whole world and saw all things, and his two ravens, Hugin, mind, and Munin, memory, sat on his shoulders every eve and whispered in his ears the world's tidings and events. In my previous work, I endeavoured to show that Odin was the same teacher or leader as Moses, which is confirmed in many directions, and in Odin's never-closing eye, the city of the Jews, which had so determinedly worshipped that remarkable man's nebulae deity Jehovah, was, one might say, the apple of his eye, Odin's city. This view is necessarily conjecture, but it explains the name whereby Odin or Moses' city was so termed, the Eye of Odin. In any case, its iniquity was profound, and hence we find Gildas, the monkish historian, son of the king of Dumbarton or Aclut, describing it as Car Edin, Civit Antiquissima, a most sacred and ancient